The beer mug shattered on the wooden floor with a sharp crack that instantly silenced Kelly's junction. "You think you're something special?" Talon Reese's voice sliced through the stillness like a blade. His massive hand wrapped around the collar of the small woman who'd been wiping down tables. The snarling hound tattoo coiled around Talon's thick neck twitched as he pulled her closer, his breath reeking of bourbon and menace. "I asked you a simple question, sweetheart. This bar pays protection, or this bar burns. What's it gonna be?" Serena Grant kept her brown eyes fixed on the floor, her body language radiating submission. She didn't fight back, even as 10 members of the Iron Hound's motorcycle gang rose from their seats, forming a predatory circle around her. She was maybe 5'3" in her worn-out sneakers, her white server's shirt hanging loose on her slight frame. Her dark hair, loosely curled, was pulled back into a simple ponytail that made her look even younger than her 35 years. Everything about her whispered, ordinary, vulnerable, weak. But exactly 15 minutes from now, Talon Reese would be on his knees, begging for forgiveness. The roar of Harley-Davidsons echoed down the narrow street of Fayetteville, North Carolina, rattling the windows of Kelly's Junction. A few customers turned their heads, expressions flickering between annoyance and concern. The veterans among them straightened in their seats, hands tightening instinctively around their coffee cups or beers, like their bodies remembered something their minds were trying to forget. The door swung open hard, sending the little wind chime above it, clinking against the frame. Talon Reese walked in first, towering, broad-shouldered, muscles bulging under his sleeveless leather vest. Under the bar's dim amber lights, the snarling hound tattoo wrapped around his neck seemed to twitch to life. He grinned, but it wasn't the friendly kind. "Evening, folks." His voice had that fake casual tone that smelled like gasoline, combustible and dangerous. "We're just here for a few drinks and a little business talk." 9 more bikers followed close behind, spreading out like trained predators. 2 flanked the emergency exit. 1 headed straight for the bar. 3 settled near the windows. Their movements weren't random. They were positional tactics, and Serena Grant, standing quietly by the service station, took note of everyone. In the far right corner, Sheriff Walter Reed, early 50s, gray at the temples, sat sipping black coffee. He slowly lowered his cup, eyes never leaving the leader. Talon scanned the room and paused when he saw Serena, the only one not showing fear. She was folding napkins at the counter, each triangle exact, every fold crisp. Her movements were smooth, deliberate, almost emotionless. Jake, the young bartender, barely 25, felt his heart pounding in his chest. He'd recognized the Iron Hounds the moment he saw the snarling dog patch stitched into their jackets. He leaned closer to Serena, whispering under his breath, "That's them. They're the ones who torched Old Pete's Tavern last month." Serena simply nodded without looking up. Jake didn't get it. He'd seen Serena handle drunk customers and messy fights without flinching. But now, with real danger walking through the door, she was almost too calm. At a booth near the window, one of the bikers, with meth-wrecked teeth, propped his boot on a chair, and Wolf whistled at 2 young women trying to enjoy dinner. He laughed when they looked away, embarrassed. Another waved an unlit cigarette at the ceiling, chuckling. "Gonna need a new wiring system in here if they don't start cooperating soon." He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. Sheriff Reed didn't move. Maybe because nothing illegal had happened, yet. Or maybe because he knew all too well how fast things could escalate. Talon sat down at the center table like he owned the place, legs spread wide, arms braced on the tabletop. He began tapping his fingers. Tap, tap. Tap, tap. Irritated. Waiting. Then he looked toward the bar and barked, 10 beers. Your strongest, and hustle. Jake swallowed hard and glanced at Serena. She nodded slightly and began pouring, as methodical as ever. As she carried the tray over, one of the bikers slapped her backside, cackling, How about a smile, sweetheart? You look like someone just died. Serena didn't react, just adjusted her steps slightly to move out of his reach. She placed the tray on the table, every glass upright and full, without spilling a drop. She turned to leave without a word. Jake saw it. His fists clenched, his cheeks flushed with anger, and he nearly stepped out from behind the bar, until Serena gave the slightest shake of her head. It was all it took to hold him back. Talon watched her go, smirking. Something about this woman kept pulling his attention. He raised his voice again. Hey, server girl. Where's Murphy? We got business to discuss. Serena, wiping down an already clean table, replied softly, Mr. Murphy's in Raleigh this week. I'm just covering shifts. Perfect, Talon said, rising to his full height, casting a shadow across her. Then you can pass this along. The Iron Hounds are offering protection services to this fine little spot. $5,000 a month. And we make sure nothing bad happens. If not, he flicked open a silver Zippo lighter. Click, click. The flame danced. Accidents happen. Gas leaks, faulty wiring, a fire in the middle of the night. Tragic stuff. Serena continued wiping the table. I'll let him know you stopped by, she said. Talon's grin faded. His eyes darkened. He wasn't used to being ignored, especially not by someone who was supposed to cower. Sheriff Reed shifted in his seat. His hand moved subtly toward his hip, toward where his service weapon would be if he were in uniform. No one else moved. No one dared. Talon leaned closer. I don't think you understand, sweetheart. This ain't a friendly visit. This is non-negotiable. He lit the Zippo again. The flame reflected in both his eyes, and Serena's. But she didn't flinch. And what no one, least of all Talon, could have known, was that in that exact moment, inside her mind, a full tactical map was forming, down to every threat, every angle, every escape route. The air inside Kelly's junction hung heavy. No punches had been thrown, no guns drawn, no blood spilled. But anyone who had ever worn a uniform could feel it. The fight had already begun, and the enemy had taken their positions. Talon Reese sat like he was hosting a biker club reunion, all swagger and smirks, but his eyes were sharp, constantly scanning the room. The average patrons shrank into silence, while the veterans began to assess their surroundings again, not out of fear, but from deeply ingrained reflex. Serena Grant kept working. She was wiping down a table near the entrance, her cloth moving in precise, controlled squares, over and over again, like a ritual. She never kept her back to the door for more than 3 seconds. Every time she set the rag down, her eyes flicked sideways, scanning exits, angles, movements. Jake, still behind the bar drying glasses, couldn't take his eyes off her. He'd worked with Serena for nearly 8 months. He knew she was quiet, punctual, methodical. But now, for the first time, he noticed there was something different about how she moved. No stumbles, no unnecessary steps. If a customer shifted suddenly, she paused just in time, like she had anticipated it. There was nothing random about her. Everything felt programmed. She's not cleaning, Jake thought. She's controlling the space. One of the bikers, the one nicknamed Stitch, for the long, jagged scar stitched crudely across his neck, approached the bar, beer bottle in hand. Hey, server girl, he slurred. Come on over and top this off for me. Serena turned and walked toward him with her usual unreadable expression. She took the bottle from his hand, tilting her head slightly in acknowledgement. Stitch didn't even try to be subtle. His eyes traveled from her neck down to her waist and back up again. Then he grinned. "You're the right kind, sweetheart. Small, quiet, easy to train. But damn, you're cold. Ain't no one ever warmed you up before?" He reached out and brushed her hair, pretending it was playful, though his eyes betrayed a darker intent. Serena didn't flinch. She didn't scowl, didn't recoil. She simply tilted her head just enough for his hand to pass through empty air. A calculated evasion that mirrored close-quarter combat training. Jake saw it all. His face flushed with anger, and the glass in his hand nearly slipped. "That's enough," he growled under his breath. He started to step from behind the bar, but Serena glanced at him and gave him a barely perceptible shake of her head. That look wasn't pleading. It wasn't scared. It was an order. "Stand down." Jake froze, as if held in place by invisible wire. Serena began pouring the refill with her left hand. Her right hovered near her apron. Jake suddenly realized he had no idea what she kept tucked beneath that apron. When the bottle was full, she set it down gently, nodded, and walked away. Stitch just stood there for a moment, confused, still not realizing he'd just been outmaneuvered. She returned to cleaning. This time it was the table near the sink, next to the window. Again, she wiped in tight, perfect squares. Jake remembered now. Serena always cleaned like that. Every table, whether it had ketchup stains, spilled beer, or just dust, got the same treatment. 4 deliberate passes in the same pattern, then a final swipe along the edge. He used to think it was OCD, but now it felt like something else entirely. It felt like training. On the other side of the room, Sheriff Reed hadn't moved, but his eyes had narrowed. He saw it too, the rhythm, the spacing, the way Serena observed the bikers not as people, but as potential threats, like reading a battlefield map. Some of the older patrons, quiet since the Iron Hounds arrived, were also beginning to straighten in their seats. One had a paratrooper tattoo. Another wore a faded POW bracelet. One had on an old Army-issue button-down shirt. They didn't speak, but their eyes no longer looked away. Serena turned her back to the room for just a moment to grab a tray, then turned back after exactly 3 seconds. Jake was stunned. He realized she never kept her back to an open space for more than that. He'd worked alongside her for months, but never noticed it before. Now, it was obvious. She was someone who never stopped reading the room. Someone who'd lived in places where letting your guard down could get you killed. In the center of the bar, Talon exhaled a ring of cigarette smoke and gave a low chuckle. "There's something off about that server girl." He scanned the room. Serena was standing barely 2 meters away. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't avoiding. She was simply preparing. And in a fleeting moment, as she knelt down to pick up a broken glass near a back booth, she reached under her collar and touched something, just for a second. A worn dog tag. She brushed it with her thumb, feeling the cool metal, then let it fall back beneath her shirt, so fast that no one noticed. Except Sheriff Reed, a man who had once served in Afghanistan, and who knew exactly what a gesture like that meant. Talon Reese leaned forward on the table like a mob boss waiting for a report. The air inside the bar was still thick, with sweat, cigarette smoke, and something harder to define but impossible to ignore. Imminent danger. Serena approached with another tray of beers. Her hands were steady, her gaze never lingering more than a second on anyone. She set each glass down in precise order, left to right, evenly spaced. It was almost hypnotic in its discipline. Talon tilted his head, watching her like a predator sizing up prey. "You're efficient, I'll give you that," he said with a lazy grin. "Let's just wrap this up nice and easy. $5,000 a month. We take care of everything. No junkies smashing windows, no fights breaking out, and definitely no mysterious fires." Serena didn't flinch. She was still wiping a ring of condensation from the tabletop, not a tremor in her fingers. "I'm just an employee," she said quietly. "I don't handle financial decisions." Talon exhaled sharply, stretching his grin wider like someone trying to teach a slow student. "You don't have to decide. Just pass along the message. And to make it real simple, let me put it like this. If Murphy doesn't cooperate, Kelly's junction goes up in flames within 3 days. Got it?" Serena nodded, neither fast nor slow. "I'll pass the message," she repeated. Behind the bar, Jake was gripping a bar towel so tightly his knuckles were white. Sheriff Reed was still silent, eyes locked on Talon, watching, calculating. Talon emphasized every word. "Good. Because this ain't a suggestion. It's a warning." He pulled a gold-plated Zippo from his vest pocket and flicked it open. Click. Clack. Click. The metallic snap echoed through the room like a ticking bomb. Serena looked at the flame for just a moment, only a second, then bent to pick up an empty bottle near the table leg. And in that small motion, her collar shifted, revealing a glimpse of something metallic around her neck. A dog tag, dulled with age. Sheriff Reed saw it. His brows lifted slightly, but he said nothing. Talon saw it too, but didn't know what he was looking at. He assumed it was jewelry. "What's that you got there, sweetheart? Keepsake from an old boyfriend?" Serena calmly tucked the chain back into her shirt, not answering. It was a small action, seemingly meaningless, but to Sheriff Reed, it was another piece of the puzzle. The way she moved, the way she cleaned, like she was scanning sectors. The constant awareness of entrances and exits, and now the dog tag. This woman wasn't just a waitress. Talon's patience began to fray. His voice dropped into something colder. "I'm trying to be nice here. You really want to test how far I'll go?" He stood abruptly, stepping into her space, towering over her like a thundercloud. "Let me ask you something. Who do you think you are? You think you can just ignore me?" Without waiting for an answer, he grabbed the front of her shirt, jerking her toward him so hard the fabric bunched and twisted around his fist. The entire bar seemed to stop breathing. Jake nearly vaulted over the bar, but Sheriff Reed lifted a hand, his voice calm but firm. "I suggest you take your hand off the lady." Talon didn't turn around. "And what if I don't, old man?" "You're not in uniform. You got no gun. You're outnumbered 10-1. Sit down before you get hurt." The sheriff didn't respond, but his eyes met Serena's, and in that look, he saw it. A shift, a spark, a readiness. She didn't struggle. She didn't cry out. But her stance had changed. Shoulders angled, feet apart, weight forward on the balls of her feet. Jake whispered to himself, "She's getting ready to strike." But Serena didn't move. Not yet. Talon leaned in close, his breath reeking of whiskey and smoke. "You want to know what your problem is?" he sneered. "You think you're better than us. Like you're too good for a little respect. Maybe I should remind you where you belong." He grabbed her shirt with both hands and pulled. The soft cotton tore down the middle, from collar to hem. In that moment, the bar fell silent. The secret Serena had kept for 3 long years, buried under simple clothes and quiet routines, was about to be revealed to everyone. Friends, strangers, and enemies. And what Talon Reese saw next would shatter his sense of power forever. The sound of tearing fabric echoed through the bar. Sharp, brutal, final, like the first shot fired in an ambush. Serena's white server shirt hung in tatters from her shoulders, torn from collar to mid-chest, fluttering like a broken flag. But what made the room freeze wasn't the violence of the act. It was what was revealed underneath. A black tank top clung to her frame, and through its thin fabric, something emerged. Something that silenced even the bravest men in the room. An eagle, globe, and anchor. Wings outstretched, talons gripping the globe, the anchor piercing through it all. The unmistakable insignia of the United States Marine Corps. Beneath it, inked in bold, unwavering strokes. First Force Recon, Gunnery Sergeant S. Grant, MOS 0311. The entire room fell into utter silence. Even the jukebox, which had been cycling through old country tracks, seemed to pause, as if the universe itself needed a moment to absorb what had just happened. The lighting didn't change. The music didn't stop. But something had shifted. Every eye was locked on one person. Serena Grant didn't speak. She didn't rush to cover herself, didn't flinch, didn't hide. She just breathed, steady, controlled, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. Talon Reese was still holding a scrap of her shirt, but his hand had begun to tremble. His jaw twitched, his mouth opened slightly, yet no sound came out. Behind him, the rest of the Iron Hounds stood motionless. Men who had walked in with swagger, arrogance, and a taste for dominance now looked like kids who'd just broken something sacred. Sheriff Reed sat up straighter, eyes locked on the tattoo. His voice, low and reverent, slipped from his mouth like a prayer. Force Recon. Every veteran in the room knew this wasn't just a unit. It was elite. They were sent where others wouldn't go, to do what others couldn't. The change in Serena's posture was subtle, but undeniable. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted. And when she spoke, it wasn't with the soft tone of a waitress. It was a voice used to being obeyed. "Mr. Reese," she said evenly, using his real name, one he hadn't shared with anyone here. "I believe you owe me an apology for destroying my property." Talon took a step back. His eyes darted around, unsure. Who the hell are you?" he stammered. "How do you know my name?" Serena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowly turned her back to the room, allowing everyone to see the tattoo stretched across her shoulder blades. And below it, the scars. One long raised scar ran from her left scapula, down beneath the edge of her tank top. A puckered bullet wound near her right ribs. Smaller, scattered marks, shrapnel, burns, incisions, laced her sides like a story written in flesh. The real veterans saw it instantly. Tattoos can be faked, but combat scars don't lie. Near the counter, Colonel Michael Haynes, the quiet man who Serena served coffee to every Wednesday, slowly rose to his feet. His voice carried the weight of command, even in civilian clothes. "Gunnery Sergeant Grant. First Force Recon. I remember you now. Fallujah, 2004. You held that schoolhouse perimeter for 17 hours while we waited for airlift." Serena turned to face him, her posture shifting just slightly. Her voice softened, just a little. "And you were the one with the jammed M16, holding the South Corridor with nothing but 3 mags and sheer will." "I didn't forget, but I had help. Lance Corporal Nguyen, PFC Carter. They didn't make it out." The mood dropped into a hush. A chair scraped the floor. Rosa Delgado, the woman who ran the flower shop down the street, stepped into the open. She removed her light jacket, revealing a faded Navy medic tattoo on her arm. U.S. Navy, Combat Medic. "I was stationed at Camp Leatherneck," she said quietly. I saw them bring you in. 60% burns, 3 gunshot wounds, and more shrapnel than a damn frag grenade. Doctors said you'd never walk again. Serena gave a small, almost private smile. Doctors can be wrong. Now the bikers began to shift uneasily, instinctively pulling away. Their former formation, once so confidently spread, had unraveled. But behind them, at various tables across the bar, others had quietly risen. 5 men, each with something in their stance, their eyes, or their tattoos, stood at attention. One wore a paratrooper insignia. Another had 3 chevrons inked on his forearm. Together, they blocked the exit. One of them, stocky, mid-40s, arms like concrete, spoke with a steady voice. "Don't think we heard an apology yet, boys. You planning to leave without saying anything?" Talon flushed, his bravado eroding fast. He looked for an escape. There wasn't one. Serena stepped forward. Though she was nearly a foot shorter than him, Talon instinctively took a step back. "You're scared," she said calmly. "Not because I've killed, but because you know I could, without needing to raise my voice." She reached behind her waist, her fingers brushing the edge of her apron, where she always kept a compact trauma kit. Packed with hemostatic agents, morphine vials, and field-grade tools, it was military issue. She still carried it, just in case. "I don't want to use this again," she added, "but I will." Talon opened his mouth to speak, but the words never came. Because in that moment, under the gaze of veterans and civilians alike, Serena Grant was no longer just a waitress. She was a warrior, risen from the ashes of memory, ready to defend something worth fighting for. Not a nation, not a flag, but this room, these people, this peace. Talon Reese, the man who had swaggered into the bar like a king, now stood trembling like a child caught stealing. Serena hadn't moved an inch, but the words she was about to speak would hit harder than any punch. "Your name is Trevor Michael Reese, born March 22nd, 1984, Baton Rouge, Louisiana." A pause. Talon's eyes darted wildly, as if hoping to deny it, but it was too late. "You enlisted in 2002, logistics, dishonorably discharged in 2006 for smuggling military equipment and siphoning fuel from Al-Assad Depot." A murmur rippled from the corner booth. One of the older vets had clearly heard of that scandal, but never known the name. Serena's voice remained level, but each word was a scalpel. "After your discharge, you slipped back into the country under a fake honorable status. 2010, you formed your first crew, the Wild Dogs. They fell apart after the warehouse explosion in Houston. In 2016, you started Iron Hounds, operating along the I-95 corridor. You're tied to at least 4 arson cases, 2 counts of aggravated assault, and 1 incident involving extortion of a VA clinic in Fayetteville." She looked directly at him now. "And you thought you could intimidate me with a lighter and a few thugs in leather jackets?" The room's atmosphere changed instantly. Customers who had shrunk into corners earlier were now standing. A tall man with silver hair rose, revealing a 101st Airborne patch on his work shirt. A middle-aged black woman in faded nurse scrubs pulled the blinds shut, turning the bar into something more like a command post. 3 construction workers removed their caps and placed them quietly on their table, eyes locked on Talon. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The tide had turned. From behind, Rosa Delgado stepped forward, her voice steady but full of weight. "Everything she's said is true. Serena Grant is Force Recon. I was the medic who injected morphine into her thigh when she was losing consciousness from blood loss." Beside her, Colonel Haynes straightened up. Fallujah, November 2004. Operation Phantom Fury. She and 2 other Marines held a school building housing 37 civilians, most of them children, for 17 hours. No reinforcements, no supplies, no evacuation route. He turned to Serena, eyes misting over. We thought they were all dead, but she crawled out of the rubble, carrying a newborn in one arm, with a shattered leg, a scorched uniform, and blood covering half her body. That baby survived. Her mother named her Serena. A wave of emotion swept through the room. Talon lowered his head, but Serena wasn't finished. You say this place needs protection. You call what you do a service. What you really do is terrorize, extort, prey on the vulnerable. She took one step forward, her voice sharpened into something like a blade. Let me make something clear, Trevor. I've seen men ripped apart by IEDs in Ramadi. I've cut an umbilical cord with a combat knife in a bunker in Tikrit. I've held the hand of a squad mate as he bled out from a neck wound because he covered a child with his body. Another step. In the places I've fought, you would have been dead a long time ago. Talon flinched as if struck. His crew was unraveling behind him. The bikers who'd once flanked him now edged toward the door, only to find it blocked by customers who had become a silent wall of resistance. Jake, still behind the bar, whispered to himself, "She doesn't need a weapon. She has her words." Serena scanned the room. "I'm not asking to be called a hero. I don't need my name on a wall. All I ask is this: don't let men like Trevor Reese use the word protection as an excuse to cause harm." A murmur swept through the bar like a low wind before a storm. Talon opened his mouth, perhaps to justify, apologize, or lash out. But no sound came, because even he understood. Words couldn't save him now. There was only one direction left to go. Down. No one said a word. The ceiling fan hummed softly overhead. A flickering light near the bar buzzed faintly. The entire diner seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the final beat of a battle without bullets. Serena stood still, her gaze locked on Talon, not with anger, nor satisfaction. What radiated from her now was the unshakable resolve of someone who had once commanded orders in a war zone, and who now knew exactly what she was protecting. "You assaulted me, damaged property, and threatened my co-workers and this place," she said, her voice calm but ringing clearly to every corner of the room. "Where I've served, this would have been dealt with immediately." She stepped forward, not quickly, not threateningly, just with absolute control. "But this is Fayetteville, and we do things differently here." She paused, eyes sharp as forged steel. "So I'm giving you 2 options. 1, you apologize. Right now, in front of everyone, using your real name. 2, I hand you over to the sheriff with all the testimonies, video footage, and statements I've gathered. And believe me, the line of witnesses will stretch down the block." Talon opened his mouth to speak. His eyes darted around the room for backup. But the gang members who'd once flanked him were no longer by his side. They had drifted toward the edges of the crowd. Now they stood among the townspeople, among the veterans, among eyes that no longer showed fear, but a readiness to act. He was utterly alone. He let out a weak laugh, trying to save face. "Hey, there's no need to blow this up. We didn't know who you were. If you had, Serena cut in sharply. "You wouldn't have grabbed me, ripped my shirt open, tried to intimidate me. That's your defense?" Talon fell silent. Serena didn't wait anymore. "Kneel." The whole diner froze. Talon blinked. "What did you say?" "You heard me. Trevor Michael Reese. You will get down on your knees, right here, and say loud and clear, "I'm sorry, Serena Grant." If not, you'll be leaving here not on your feet, but in handcuffs. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. A weather report. A community-backed decree. Talon swallowed hard. Sweat beaded on his brow. His hands trembled. He scanned the room. Sheriff Walter Reed was pulling out his phone, finger hovering over the call button. Jake behind the bar gripped a thick glass bottle. Customers had fully surrounded the area. No exit remained. His shoulders dropped. His head bowed. And then, in front of nearly 40 people, Talon got on his knees. His knees hit the floor with a dull thud, a faint groan escaping his lips like the sound of pride collapsing. He looked up at Serena, eyes wide with shame and dread. I'm sorry. Serena Grant. I didn't know. Serena didn't flinch. She gave him a single nod, subtle, but enough to end the silent trial that had just taken place. Talon staggered to his feet, avoiding everyone's gaze, and turned to leave. But Serena's voice rang out one last time. This time, not for him, but for every soul in the diner, for the whole town of Fayetteville, and for anyone who had ever bowed to fear. Let me make this clear. Kelly's Junction and Fayetteville do not need protection rackets. She turned slowly, looking at each person in the crowd. Because here, we are protected by those who've survived the very worst corners of this world. People who've held the line for their brothers and sisters, who've shielded the innocent with their own bodies. And now, we protect each other. Not with weapons, but with truth and courage. Applause broke out. At first hesitant, then building, loud and unstoppable. It wasn't the kind of clapping you hear after a performance. It was an oath, a declaration. We hear you. We stand with you. And we won't stay silent anymore. Talon stood up shakily, his shirt rumpled, head bowed, not a trace left of the man who had swaggered minutes ago. No one stopped him. They didn't have to. The whole town had just watched him crumble. Not from violence, but from truth. He staggered toward the door. Just before stepping into the late afternoon light, he turned one last time, his face twisted with shame and defeat. I won't come back, he stammered. I swear. No one answered. They didn't need to. The door clicked shut behind him, soft and final, like a period at the end of a dark chapter. The next morning, Kelly's Junction wore a different skin. Even before the doors opened, a long line had formed outside, mostly faces that once wore uniforms. They didn't come for the food or drinks, but for something deeper: connection, solidarity, and a sense of being seen. Serena opened the door with a quiet expression of surprise. The first to step in was Colonel Haynes, now in civilian clothes, though his stance was still as commanding as ever. He nodded politely to Serena, then walked directly to the booth once claimed by the biker gang. Behind him came a group of Marine veterans, their jackets bearing familiar insignias: USMC Semper Fi, 1st Recon. They entered one by one in silence, but their presence carried weight. Jake stood behind the bar, polishing a glass, stealing glances at Serena. "Never seen the place this packed on a Monday morning," he murmured. Serena didn't respond. She moved among the tables as always, smooth, precise, alert. But this time, there was something different. A smile. For the first time since Jake had known her, Serena Grant smiled. Not a polite one, not one to deflect attention, but a true, quiet smile. Genuine. Unburdened, like someone who had just set down an invisible rucksack they'd been carrying for years. As time passed, Kelly's Junction began to change. Not loudly or dramatically, but in steady, quiet ways, just like the veterans who now filled its seats. A small wooden sign was hung by the door. Veterans welcome here. No rank, no judgment, just brotherhood. A corner of the bar was converted into a reading nook filled with war memoirs, PTSD recovery books, and resources for reintegration. Beside it, a bulletin board with a handwritten note: Fayetteville Veterans Meetup, Fridays at 7 p.m. Free coffee and Rosa's homemade pie. Locals soon realized this wasn't just a bar anymore. It had become a refuge, an unofficial base, a home base. As for Serena, she remained much the same, calm, quiet, eyes that sometimes still held flickers of distant battlefields. But now, she was no longer alone. Every shift began with greetings, nods of respect, firm handshakes. She didn't need to tell her story again. Her actions had already become legend. The bell above the door chimed again. A teenage delivery boy stepped in, froze at the crowd, confused. Is this still a bar? Serena laughed softly. It is, just a special kind now. That afternoon, the diner door chimed gently. A young woman stepped in. Her military uniform was no longer pressed, just a simple USMC field jacket draped over her shoulders. Maya Webb, early 20s, sun-kissed skin, lean build, but with eyes deep and clouded. She hovered by the entrance for a moment before approaching the counter, where Serena was polishing glasses. Are you Gunnery Sergeant Serena Grant? I used to be. Now? Just someone who pours coffee. Maya gave a nervous chuckle. I got out last month, and I don't know what to do. Every night, my head's still in Al-Assad. Everything out here feels fake. Serena set the glass down, locking eyes with the girl. You don't go back. That old life, it disappeared the first time you deployed. All you can do is rebuild a new version of yourself, from whatever pieces made it back. Maya hesitated. But how? Serena gestured around the diner, the spotless tables, the quiet laughter from a corner booth, the wrinkled hand of a veteran pouring tea for his buddy. With small things, tiny ones, wiping tables, serving others, listening to someone's story, without judging. She paused, then smiled gently. We used to fight so others could live. Now we live, to keep others whole. Later that evening, Jake leaned against the counter, a folded brochure in hand. I'm thinking of enlisting in the Marines. Serena didn't seem surprised. She quietly folded her apron, set it aside, and looked him in the eyes. Are you sure this is what you want? Or is it what you think someone you admire would do? Jake didn't answer. Serena stepped closer, her voice soft but resolute. If you enlist, do it for yourself. For a purpose you believe in, not borrowed ideals. Because war, it's real, and it's not a movie. Late at night, the diner was empty, bathed in the warm hue of low-hanging lights. Serena stood at the back wall, a quiet memorial of untouched memories. From a drawer, she retrieved an old wooden box. Opening it slowly, she pulled out a scratched purple heart medal. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned it back on the wall, right beside a faded photo of 3 Marines laughing in the dust of Fallujah. Her, Haynes, and Ramirez. She closed her eyes. A faint explosion echoed in the distance of memory. A firm hand on her shoulder. Laughter breaking through gunfire. Then, silence. Peace. She opened her eyes. Turning from the wall, Serena headed for the door. As the screen faded to black, her voice echoed, calm, steady, and full of quiet strength. We no longer carry rifles. We carry coffee, dish towels, and understanding. But the mission is the same, to protect. not in war, but in peace.